Welcome. This is the intro video to a multi-video series on translating geometry from Rhino into Revit. Basically building a parametric tower, doing everything pretty much natively in Grasshopper with just a few minimal inputs from Rhino, making it fully adaptable, and being able to translate that information directly into Rhino using a bunch of different things. So this is the tower that we're going to work on. I'll give you a little bit of an intro to kind of what I'm thinking here, and then we're going to break it down into the technical way of doing it. This is also assuming that you know a little bit of Rhino.Inside and a little bit of Revit. I have some videos to help you get to that point, which if this is part of the GSAP Revit primer class, you'll have access to those videos. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to walk you through a really kind of multi-step Grasshopper definition. I'm also going to provide that definition for you so you can just kind of follow along and look at it on your own and pull it apart, test different things out, see what works, see what doesn't work, and also you can use it as a reference when you're reconstructing it or maybe take pieces of it for your own purpose. So the idea is to, as I said, build this tower architecturally. I tried to do a couple different techniques just to show you some flexibility within Rhino and Revit. I know you guys can do a much nicer tower than I've done here. So please do not judge me on the aesthetic of the tower, but I wanted to show a broad gamut of different techniques. This is a site that I've just picked. It's on Broadway. I think it's 28th Street. Let me grab the image of this real quickly. So this is the site. It's kind of just a random, well, actually I think there's a hotel there now, but 31st and Broadway, I said 28th. My mistake. I wanted to pick a site that was a little bit atypical shaped, something on a corner to kind of show a few different conditions. I did not really do anything based on zoning. I didn't do a zoning analysis. I just kind of thought about what could this tower possibly be. I broke it down into sort of an entry facade, a podium facade, and a tower facade. We'll look at how do you create levels from that, how do you create columns, how do you create slabs, and the hope is that by the time this is all said and done, you'll be able to have a really, really strong background for a model to bring into Revit, and you'll also have the ability to get complex geometry and complex facades and complex floor plates into Revit. So to walk you through the Grasshopper definition a little bit, this is, I've got some adjustments in here for entry massing, podium massing, and tower massing. Those are all here. I'm going to turn off the background reference just to make this operate a little bit better, and I'm going to close Grasshopper for 1 second so you can see. So those are basically my references there. And again, these are all fully parametric, so we can adjust these and it'll update the tower, and I'll show you how to do that. I just kind of took the site, the property line in here. There's a curve in here. That's another reference which later is going to come into play, and I'll explain later on. But that's really all that's there from a Rhino and Revit geometry standpoint. So if I open up Grasshopper again, you can adjust the floor-to-floor heights. You can adjust the radiuses of some of the columns, the setback from the facade of the columns, the entry column spacing, different column spacing things, sort of the roundedness of some of the floor plates, the facade and the rounded facade, how many divisions there are on there. Again, I'm going to go through this step by step, so I'm just trying to give you a broad overview. And then I've broken down this definition into about 7 sections, which I think I'm going to record a video for each one. Some of them might be a little bit longer than others. All in all, I think hopefully this is only going to be about 2 or 3 hours worth of tutorials, but again, it's meant to give you a really, really broad range of techniques and skills to be able to help you successfully execute on Revit and Rhino stuff. And the end goal is all of this stuff to be able to go into Revit. So real quickly, just to show you a little bit of how this works, I can edit things like, I have some lines for the columns. You'll see those coming in later. I can adjust things like the amount of divisions on this facade. So if I make this 45, it's going to think a second. and then it'll give me more subdivisions on this facade. So here 25 was what we had before, which is about floor to floor. If I reduce this, it gives me something a little bit more faceted, actually kind of nice. But you know, that's controls the divisions of that. I can also, if I just shut off some of these previews real quick, let me see, I'll shut off the previews of the facade. Or you know what, before I do that, let me show you how, you know, you can edit the size of these panels down here. So these will change. If I make this, I'll make this 10 just to show you sort of a much bigger situation. Undo that. And you can see how that updates. Thinking, doing a little bit of work. That's all actually opening and closing depending on how close it is to this curve. So you can see a little bit of the patterning in here. Again, it's going to think for a second, but it's going to adjust the openness. It's more open up here now because of the curve, so you can get sort of these different gradients depending on that. And again, all of this stuff will eventually go into Revit. Let me hide this so you can see the different floor slabs. So you can see the floor to floor heights in here. That is being controlled by here. So if I wanted to change the tower floor to floor to, let's say, 10 feet, I can click that. It's going to think for a little bit, but it gave me a whole new, it changed the spacing of all these. It also redeployed the columns based off of that. So lots of intelligence in this. But the nice final thing is getting it all into Revit. And so what I've done here is, because it can take a little bit of time to get this stuff into Revit, especially the facade, I've set this up so that it is done with a true false, so I can work and I can manipulate my massing and things like that without having this be, well, let me show you how to manipulate the massing actually. So if I turn on maybe the tower massing for a second and I want to pull this corner out, I can just grab this corner. Let me grab that edge. Move this out like this. And it's going to think for a second. But then the whole entire tower updates and the facade will as well. So it's really tied into the massing. So just to kind of show you a little bit better, I pulled that corner out and everything updated. But once I kind of get it in a spot geometrically where I like, I can deploy the Revit structure. And again, I can delete it and redo it. It's not like a one-time thing. It just takes some time. So while you're doing design iterations, it's a good idea to not have the Revit constantly updating in the background. So to just show you real quick how that would work, I'm going to just pull this off the screen. I'm going to open up Revit for a second, if I can find it. Okay, here's Revit. I'll move this out of the way. You're going to see me moving these windows around a lot. It's Rhino.Inside's a hard software to work with when you are doing if you only have one screen or you're only recording on one screen. So I'm going to do the deploy Revit structure toggle. I'm going to turn that to true, and my grasshopper is thinking a bit, and I will probably fast forward this portion of the video. This part actually doesn't take too long. So let's see what happens. It's thinking. You can see that it's actually kind of going through all of the different operations. Okay, so I paused it and resumed it. That maybe took about 30 seconds. But you can see that all of these are now actually native Revit elements. They're not imports, and that's an important distinction. We'll talk about that. These columns are actually imports, and I'll explain why. But now we've got, you know, a pretty decent structure, and we've got all the levels set up as well, which was done through Revit. So we're not having to kind of redraw levels and things like that. I can create all my views from these levels, which helps. And then what I'm going to do is show you real quick. I'm going to check on the deploy Revit facade and turn that to true. And I'm going to, this takes quite some time, so I'm going to pause and come back. Okay, so here's the tower. It probably took about 5 minutes to process in total. But again, we have all of these individual Revit curtain panels. These are adaptive panels, which we'll talk about. We have some direct shapes, and we are also going to have direct shapes, which are imports. Again, we'll talk about, and then we're going to have some native Revit curtain walls as well, which I'll show you guys how to do. All right, so that's how this works, and I'm going to start a brand new file. So I'm going to save out of this and come back to you with a brand new file to show you how to get this set up. Okay, so I'm back. We're going to start from scratch, same place that you guys will be working from. I'm going to open up Revit first. I'm in Revit 2022. I need to upgrade, but anything 2022 or later should be fine. You guys are probably in 2023, maybe 2024. I'm just going to let it open up. It's important to open up Revit. Some of the stuff that we're going to be doing in Grasshopper can be done natively in Grasshopper, but there's actually a lot of components that are Rhino.Inside components, and they are not available unless you open up Grasshopper through Revit. So there is a world in which you get a portion of this done without doing it through Revit, but I'm just going to work in Revit to start and open up Rhino.Inside through here. So I'm going to start with a blank file, and I'm actually going to come and I'm going to delete my levels. It's going to give me a warning that the views will be deleted. That's okay, because I'm going to recreate the levels myself using Rhino.Inside. I'm going to go into add-ins, I'm going to go into Rhino.Inside. Depending on your version, you may have to go to add-ins, click on Rhino.Inside, and then this tab will pop up. In my version, Rhino.Inside tab is there. It all depends on which version you have. So if you don't see this tab, go to add-ins and click on it. So I'm going to click on start. And it's going to think for a second. So what it's doing is it's actually opening up a version of Rhino within the Revit environment, which allows me to do a lot of stuff that taps into the Revit API that I wouldn't normally be able to do in Rhino and Grasshopper. So once this is set, I actually click on Rhino and it opens a Rhino. This opened on my other screen. I get a standard Rhino. It'll have all your plugins, all your settings. I've got my custom toolbar in here. This will be just like your version of Rhino that you have on your machine. Whatever settings you have in there, they will come into here. But then once I do this, I now have my Rhino file. I'm gonna, open up a new file. Just want to make sure I'm using the right units and stuff. I want this to be large objects feet. Okay. And then I got all of my, or you know what? I'm just going to open up my Revit Primer tutorial model because you guys know how to set up Rhino. So I'm not going to go too crazy with that. What I did do while this is opening is I took the New York City 3D map that they have. So if you go to this website, NYC 3D Model by Community District, they have pretty detailed models of different areas of the city. You can see they haven't been updated since 2018, so not everything is going to be up to date. Hence, the model I use has an empty site where there's actually a building now that's been there for at least a year. So it's a little bit out of date, but it's good enough for what we're going to use it for. Once I got that in, that's basically why it's taking a long time to load, is to get that model loaded. I can turn that on. All I did was align it to the site. And if I go to a wireframe mode here, I've got the property line this is my origin. So if I hit PL0, I can see that's my origin. I have the property line there, and then I've got it 90 degrees off of that for at least one of the property lines. That's important for Revit and translating back and forth. So it's when you're planning to eventually work in Revit, it's really smart to spend a few extra minutes and get this set up the way that you want it to at this point. So now that this is all set up, I like to keep my Grasshopper inputs on their own layer so I can hide those as needed. I have my property line or my site boundary on there. I have my reference, which is my city, which I'm just going to turn off for now. It's more just there to actually see kind of what the context is and design based on the context, but also just to kind of show a final preview when all is said and done. I was not super precise with this. You can see there's a gap between the buildings. Again, I was just using it more for a reference, and I haven't done really any zoning or any type of analysis to see whether or not this is compliant. But you know, this is more about just showing the different geometric capabilities of Rhino.Inside. So I'm going to turn off that, turn off my reference. This curve here, we're going to create later on, so I'm going to delete that for now. But really all I did was give myself 3 different levels. I have my entry level. This is, I believe, 20 feet tall. Yep, it's 20 feet. Then my podium, which is another 40 feet. And then my tower, I think, is 300 on top of that. Yeah, 300. And this is got some curvature in it. It's got a flat face on the back, a flat face on that back, and then these 3 are all curving in somewhat slightly different directions and kind of curving back, curving in plan, twisting. I wanted to get some variation in there to show you how we can handle all sorts of that. These are all flat faces in the Z direction. All right, so now that our file's set up, the next thing we would do is open up Grasshopper. And I'm just going to do that now, and I'm going to actually stop the video and start with the first portion of this, which is getting everything set up and setting up construction geometry in Rhino Grasshopper. So I'll be back with that in a minute.